Tantor Audio presents Bad Faith, When Religious Belief Undermines Modern Medicine by Paul A. Offit, M.D., narrated by Tom Perkins. Introduction. At the Crossroads. I went down to the crossroads, fell down on my knees, asked the Lord above for mercy, save me if you please. Robert Johnson. On April 13, 2013, Brandon Schabel, the 7-month-old son of Herbert and Catherine Schabel, died. For several days Brandon had suffered from pneumonia. The Schabels prayed, but to no avail. At 8 p.m. they called caretakers at the John F. Fleury and Sons Funeral Home, who called the county medical examiner, who called the police. Paramedics rushed to the house and pronounced the child dead. It wasn't the first time the Schabels had lost a child to a treatable illness. A few years earlier, in 2009, the Schabels had also chosen prayer instead of antibiotics for their 2-year-old son, Kent, when he contracted bacterial pneumonia. Herbert and Catherine Schabel are members of the First Century Gospel Church, a faith-healing group in northeast Philadelphia that relies on the advice given in James 5:14-15. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call the elders of the church to pray over him and anoint him with oil in the name of the Lord, and the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. After Kent died, Herbert said, "We tried to fight the devil, but the devil won." Every year, tens of thousands of Americans refuse medical care for their children in the name of God. In 2009, a 17-year-old girl was admitted to a hospital in northeastern Pennsylvania with severe anemia. The doctor told her parents that she needed a blood transfusion to survive. Because the girl and her parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, they refused, quoting Leviticus 7:26. "And wherever you live, you must not eat the blood of any bird or animal." The doctor got a court order to allow the transfusion that saved her life. 4 years later, the patient, now married and 21 years old, returned to the hospital. She wanted to tell a group of medical students not to make the same mistake on other Jehovah's Witnesses that her doctor had made on her. Intelligent, well-spoken, and attractive, with long brown hair and a disarmingly calm demeanor, she stood in front of a group of stunned students and explained how eternal paradise could no longer be hers. "I would rather have died pure," she said, "than to live impure." So moving was her speech that several medical students said that, if confronted with a similar situation, they wouldn't give a blood transfusion. On August 22, 2003, Ray Hempel, an evangelist at the Faith Temple Church of Apostolic Faith in Milwaukee, performed an exorcism on Terrence Cottrell, Jr., an 8-year-old boy with autism. Hempel quoted Mark 1:25-26. "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. Hempel placed Terrence on the floor, put his knee on the boy's chest, and screamed, "In the name of Jesus, devil, get out!" 2 hours later, Terrence Cottrell, Jr. was dead. The coroner reported that Terrence had died from mechanical asphyxiation due to external chest compression. In 2005, in response to growing demand, a Pontifical Academy in Rome sponsored an exorcism training course in Baltimore. More than 100 priests and bishops showed up. In November 2004, New York City's Department of Health received a report about 2 newborn boys from Brooklyn who had suffered herpes virus infections. Both had been circumcised by the same ultra-Orthodox Jewish moil, person who performs a ritual circumcision, who pointed to a 16th-century religious text stating that, after performing a circumcision, we spit blood into the earth. 8 years later, on June 8, 2012, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, researchers traveled to New York City to investigate another herpes outbreak. This time it wasn't 2 babies who'd been infected with herpes, it was 11. 2 of the 11 had died, and 2 others had suffered permanent brain damage. All had been circumcised by moils who had used their mouths to suck off the blood. New York City health officials estimate that the procedure, called metsitsa b'peh, sucking with the mouth, is performed on about 3,600 babies in their city every year, and on tens of thousands throughout the world. On August 14, 2013, 16 people in Tarrant County, Texas, including a 4-month-old infant, came down with measles. A few days later, another 5 children from nearby Denton County also developed measles. All of the cases were traced to the Eagle Mountain International Church, a ministry associated with a popular televangelist named Kenneth Copeland. Measles had spread through the congregation, the staff, and a daycare center on church property. Virtually everyone who became infected was unvaccinated. During the outbreak, churchgoers were unafraid, "'Cause I know Jesus is a healer," said one, "so I know that he's covered us with his blood." More than 1,000 people in the surrounding communities were exposed in what became the largest measles outbreak in the United States in more than 20 years. Frightened, church officials immediately encouraged parishioners to get their measles vaccine. On any given day in America, tens of thousands of children whose parents have chosen not to vaccinate them for religious reasons can be found in daycare centers, schools, playgrounds, and churches across the country. On November 3, 2009, a 27-year-old mother of 4 entered St. Joseph's Medical Center, a Roman Catholic hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. The woman was 11 weeks pregnant and gravely ill, suffering from a disorder called pulmonary hypertension. Because the arterial pressure in her lungs was extremely high, the right side of her heart, which pumps blood to the lungs, had begun to fail, badly. The problem had been caused by her pregnancy. For the next several weeks, doctors tried to treat her disease and save her unborn child, but her condition worsened. It soon became clear that unless she had an abortion, her chance of dying was close to 100%. 3 weeks later, on November 27th, when the woman was on the verge of death, hospital physicians consulted St. Joseph's Medical Ethics Board and its director, Sister Margaret Mary McBride. Recognizing that 4 children were about to lose their mother, McBride approved the abortion, and the woman's life was saved. The abortion at St. Joseph's soon came to the attention of Thomas J. Olmsted, Bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Phoenix, who immediately excommunicated McBride and severed ties with the hospital. The 700-bed hospital was asked to remove the Blessed Sacrament from its chapel and told it could no longer celebrate Mass. "The direct killing of an unborn child is always immoral no matter the circumstances," said Olmsted, "and it cannot be permitted in any institution that claims to be authentically Catholic." St. Joseph's Hospital is one of 600 Catholic hospitals in the United States. 45 are sole providers for their communities. During the past few years, books written by non-believers have become quite popular, most notably The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, The End of Faith by Sam Harris, and God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens. All of these books claim that religion is illogical and potentially harmful. I assumed that as I uncovered story after story of medical neglect in the name of God, I would come to the same conclusion, but I didn't. Somewhere during the process of reading large sections of the Old and New Testament, I changed my mind, finding myself largely embracing religious teachings, sort of like the man who went to church to find God but found religion instead. The Old Testament contains hundreds of mitzvahs, or good deeds, literally commandments. To be a good Jew means to perform those deeds, to honor your parents, family, friends, neighbors, and strangers with acts of selflessness. The New Testament isn't much different. At its heart is the fundamental message of Jesus Christ. But now faith, hope, and love abide these 3, but the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians 13:13. Sometimes this passage is interpreted as faith, hope, and charity. In either case, to be a good Christian means to be a loving person, to be charitable, to care about those around you, especially those who are suffering or in need. As a pediatrician, I was most affected by Matthew 25:40. "Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of my brethren, you have done it unto me." A passage that could be emblazoned onto the entranceway of every children's hospital in the world. What I have learned is that to be truly religious is to be humane, to find that greater part of ourselves, something that causes us to do extraordinary acts of love and kindness, that allows us to see ourselves as part of a larger community. In the name of religion, people have counseled the addicted, ministered to the downtrodden, fed the poor, housed the homeless, helped tsunami victims, and served as beacons in the fight against slavery and for civil rights. But religion has also been used to justify some of humankind's most unconscionable acts. This book is about trying to understand why we allow that to happen, why we allow people to claim that they are acting in the name of God when they are doing no such thing. One story summarizes the point of this book. In 2014, our infectious diseases team at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia was asked to evaluate a little girl who suffered from bacterial meningitis. She came into the hospital with fever and seizures. Despite antibiotics, the fever continued. So did the seizures. Eventually, her brain pushed down onto her brainstem, causing her to stop breathing. Now she's in a vegetative state, unlikely to see, hear, speak, or walk ever again. Her parents had chosen not to vaccinate her for religious reasons. Given that the strain of bacteria that caused her disease was preventable by a vaccine, it was an unfortunate choice. During rounds, I felt like doing something that I obviously could never do. Walk into the room, put my arms around the parents, point to their comatose, helpless child and ask, "Does this look like a religious act to you? Do you really think that God wants your child to suffer like this? Is this what religion is all about?" The reader will be surprised to learn that the hero of this book isn't science or medicine or doctors. It's religion. The journey will include understanding how organized religions can become destructive cults, exploring the psychological forces that have allowed some parents to watch their children slowly die from treatable diseases, often knowing that the diseases were treatable, examining how literal interpretations of religious scriptures have been used to justify some of our most inhumane acts, explaining why American politicians, prosecutors, and judges have been limited in their ability to protect children from harm caused by certain religious rituals, a problem caused when two Watergate co-conspirators threw a wrench into the justice system, and, perhaps most difficult of all, tackling the issue of abortion in an attempt to understand the line that separates respect for the unborn child from disregard for the pregnant woman. Although many of the stories you are about to read are unimaginably painful and sad, one stands above the rest. It's the story of a mother who found order in chaos, humanity in alienation, and redemption in sin. The worst kind of sin. This book will begin and end with her. 1. The Very Worst Thing. You always think you know the worst thing, but it's never the very worst thing. Richard Ford, Canada. Rita Swan was born in 1943 in Ogden, Utah, the first of 6 children. When she was 4, her father converted to Christian Science. Soon, both her mother and father experienced Christian Science healings. The father, whose doctor had given him pink medicine and brown medicine for a throat condition, threw the medicine down the toilet and quickly recovered. The mother, who had been burned by lye while scrubbing floors, converted when the burn marks on her hands miraculously disappeared. All 6 children were raised without medical care. All survived. Rita enthusiastically embraced the religion of her parents. I prayed for the animals when they were sick. For the ones that recovered, we gave credit to Christian Science. One time our cat was bitten by a snake and his face swelled up. So we gave him a treatment, which is an argumentative form of prayer. It argues that the disease is unreal because God didn't make it, and God is good, and God is the only power. You just have to keep arguing to convince yourself that the disease is an illusion. It's an error. It's not part of God's creation. In reality, you are a perfect image of God, so you can't be sick, and you keep formulating these arguments to yourself over and over again until the disease disappears. When the cat recovered, the family gave him a Christian Science name. They called him the Demonstrator. The Swan family had embraced a relatively modern religion, established only 70 years before Rita was born. It was founded by a woman who was at one time homeless, but who died a millionaire. Mary Baker Eddy was born on July 16, 1821, in Bow, New Hampshire, the youngest of 6 children. Her father, Mark Baker, was a justice of the peace and a congregational church deacon. Her mother, Abigail, believed Mary was a divine spirit sent by God. As a child, Mary suffered a variety of illnesses. Mary Baker's fits frequently came on without the slightest warning, recalled a contemporary. At times the attack resembled a convulsion. Mary pitched headlong on the floor and rolled and kicked, writhing and screaming in apparent agony. Her father would hitch up the wagon and maniacally flog the horses on the way to the doctor's office, all the time shouting, "Mary is dying!" Eddy's illnesses persisted. Throughout adolescence she was gravely ill one minute and fine the next. One biographer described her as an anthology of 19th-century nervous ailments. Because Mary believed her symptoms were brought on by noise, she covered a nearby wooden bridge with sawdust. When that didn't work, she killed the frogs outside her home. By the time she was an adult, and had gone through 2 marriages and given birth to a child whom she later abandoned, Eddy had experimented with a variety of treatments to cure her ailments. She had tried mesmerism, hypnosis, and special diets. She had tried homeopathy, where medicines are diluted to the point that they aren't there anymore. And she had tried hydropathy, drinking large quantities of water. But her moment of clarity came in June 1862, when she visited the Vail Hydropathic Institute in Hill, New Hampshire. It was there that Eddy heard about a man who would change her life and provide the philosophical basis for her soon-to-be-founded religious movement. His name was Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. Quimby was the son of a blacksmith. As a young man, he was fascinated with electricity and magnets, believing they had curative powers. Although poorly educated and largely illiterate, he founded a healing cult that centered on hypnotism, massage therapy, and the power of suggestion. Quimby argued that if emotions can cause physical illnesses, as Freud later proved, then all illnesses could be reversed by the right kind of thinking. Disease is a belief, he declared. In October 1862, when she was 41 years old, Mary Baker Eddy visited Phineas Quimby at the International Hotel in Portland, Maine. She wanted him to treat her back pain. After she was cured, and inspired by Quimby's power of suggestion therapy, Eddy set upon a path to cure others. Unlike Quimby, however, Eddy's healings had a theological underpinning. In February 1866, after she slipped on the icy streets of Lynn, Massachusetts, Eddy turned to the Bible for relief, reading the passage about Jesus' healing of a paralyzed man. Later she testified, "Ever after I was in better health than I had before enjoyed." Eddy had experienced her epiphany. She would create a religion that combined Quimby's power of suggestion with the healing ministry of Jesus. Christian Science was born. At first, Eddy's healings resembled those of the psychics, spiritualists, and mediums of her day. She held seances claiming to see spirits of the departed, and she fell into trances, supposedly locating lost items, missing persons, and, in one inspired moment, Captain Kidd's buried treasure. In 1875, Eddy wrote Science and Health with a Key to the Scriptures, the book that would become the Bible of her religion, and a book she would revise about 300 times. 17 years later, she founded the Mother Church of Christian Science in Boston. Eddy believed that the material world, which includes sin, illness, falsehood, poverty, war, and death, is just an illusion, as is the physical body. The only realities are God and his spiritual mirror image, man. She reasoned that because all diseases are caused by ignorance of God, the only way to treat them was to draw closer to God through prayer. Eddie had gone one step beyond Quimby. Although Quimby believed that all diseases were the consequence of mental states, he still believed that diseases existed. Eddie, on the other hand, believed that diseases were imaginary. Whereas Quimby believed in mind over matter, Eddie didn't believe in matter. "You say a boil is painful," wrote Eddie, "but that is impossible, for matter without mind is not painful. Because boils don't exist, they don't need to be lanced." Eddie used the term science because healings could be demonstrated, and Christian because healings follow the ministry of Jesus. Christian Science, however, differs from Christianity in nearly every central doctrine. Most importantly, whereas Christians believe that Jesus died for their sins, Christian scientists believe that Jesus died to prove that diseases aren't real. As for the word science, Christian Science doesn't incorporate any known scientific discipline. Arguably, Christian Science is neither Christian nor science. Mary Baker Eddy's philosophies captivated a nation. By 1925, more than 200,000 people were Christian Scientists, a growth rate that exceeded every other religion. Christian Science churches could be found in every state, and Christian Science reading rooms in most cities and towns, all luxuriously appointed, all further evidence of the religion's newfound financial prowess. The success of Christian Science in the late 1800s and early 1900s can be explained in part by the woeful state of medicine at the time. When Eddy was formulating her theories, medicine had little to offer apart from quinine to treat malaria, a vaccine to prevent smallpox, and ether and chloroform for general anesthesia. Treatments consisted of emetics, bloodletting, scarifications, and corrosives. Worse, therapeutic standards, physician licensing boards, and hospital accreditation committees didn't exist. Anyone could call himself a doctor, and did. Hucksterism was rampant. Ben Franklin suggested that prayer worked because it allowed people to avoid doctors, who usually did more harm than good. One anatomist said, "The only difference between a young and an old physician is that the former will kill you, and the latter will let you die." But Christian Science was different, liberating. Eddy's religion put the power to heal in the hands of the people, offering control where there had been none, and hope where there had been little. And more than any other church, Eddy empowered women, providing them with jobs as spiritual healers. Medical science, however, didn't stand still. Before Eddy died, both a vaccine to prevent rabies and a serum to treat diphtheria became available. Soon, proof that specific germs caused specific diseases led to life-saving sanitation programs. But Mary Baker Eddy continued to ignore the scientific advances around her. "If I harbored the idea that bacteria caused disease," she said, "I should think myself in danger of catching it." By 1910, the year of Eddy's death, Salvarsan, the first antibiotic, had been invented. Syphilis was now a treatable disease. 2 years later, phenobarbital, the first medicine to treat epilepsy, became available. Within a decade of Eddy's death, insulin was isolated. Within 2 decades, penicillin was discovered. Medical schools now had to be licensed, and physicians had to pass qualifying exams. In the midst of all of these discoveries, however, Christian Scientists remained firmly planted in the past, refusing to embrace a wealth of medical advances, choosing instead to believe that illnesses were imaginary, and that the only road to cure was prayer. In 1944, Rita Swan's father was drafted into the Army, causing the family to move to posts in San Antonio, Texas, St. Cloud, Minnesota, Lawrence, Kansas, Pocatello, Idaho, and Ogden, Utah, eventually settling in Pittsburgh, Kansas, where they operated a small farm. "We were poor," recalled Rita. "My father sold livestock and feed supplements on commission. I grew up in a 2-bedroom home with 6 kids in the Flint Hills of Kansas, with no running water, no central heat, certainly no air conditioning, and no indoor plumbing. My 3 brothers slept in one bed. My sister and I slept in bunk beds in the same room. The baby slept in my parents' room. The Swans were largely isolated in their beliefs. Rita was the only Christian Scientist at her rural high school. I didn't really have friends at all, she recalled. I just didn't fit in. They weren't interested in me. I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance, I didn't know any popular music. I didn't have contemporary clothes. I felt alienated. No one would extend themselves to me. My only satisfaction was getting A's. But it wasn't a class that respected intelligence. Fewer than 5% of our class went to college back in those days. When she was 16 years old, Rita Swan graduated as the valedictorian of her high school class. In the fall, she attended Kansas State Teachers College in Emporia, Kansas, now Emporia State University, and quickly joined a Christian Science organization on campus. That's where I met my husband. I went to a Christian Science meeting and he was there on the doorstep. We began dating and were engaged 3 or 4 months later. I was 17 years old. Doug was the first guy I had ever dated. After Rita's freshman year at Kansas State Teachers College, Doug went to Michigan State University to get a master's degree in mathematics. 2 years later, in 1963, Rita graduated from college, married Doug, and moved to Elsa, Illinois, the home of Principia College, the only Christian Science college in the world, where Doug taught math. Rita taught English at Monticello College, an all-girls school 10 miles down the road. It was quite a plum, a mark of prestige, recalled Rita. Suddenly we were living in a community that was entirely Christian Science, and they all seemed to be making it work. They never got sick that we knew of. They gave testimonies at church about their healings, and they were very happy people. They never complained. As far as we could tell, they lived up to all the ideals of Christian Science. Doug eventually earned a Ph.D. in mathematics from the University of Vermont, and Rita a Ph.D. in English from Vanderbilt University. Her dissertation was on Percy Shelley and British Romantic poetry. Then Rita Swan faced the first major test of her faith. On October 20th, 1969, Rita celebrated the birth of her first child, Catherine. Soon after, Rita suffered abdominal pain and irregular vaginal bleeding. I was petrified, she recalled. I had lots of Christian Science treatments, and sometimes the pain would go away dramatically. Sometimes it wouldn't go away. In 1976, after Rita became pregnant with her second child, Matthew, the pain returned. During my 4th month of pregnancy, I suffered extreme, severe abdominal pain on my left side, really excruciating pain. Because Christian Science allows for prenatal care, Rita went to a doctor. Mary Baker Eddy had allowed doctors to attend Christian Science births following a lawsuit involving the death of both a mother and her newborn. He felt this thing growing on my left side and asked me to get an ultrasound. The doctor was convinced that Rita had either an ovarian tumor or an ovarian cyst. Rita immediately sought out a Christian Science practitioner who assured her that the mass was just an illusion. "The doctor doesn't know what he's talking about," the practitioner reassured. "It's all just speculation." After several intense sessions of Christian Science prayer, Rita had her ultrasound. The tumor was gone. "I thought Christian Science had accomplished a miracle," said Rita. "I thought it had dissolved this growth that the doctor was feeling. I told the Christian Science practitioner and she was walking on air. We thanked God. We praised God." The doctor, now convinced that Rita was suffering from an ovarian cyst, explained that cysts can either twist and cause pain or rupture and cause massive bleeding. Either way, he predicted that Rita's ordeal wasn't over. 6 weeks after Rita delivered Matthew, the doctor felt the growth again. "I was just devastated," recalled Rita, "because you have this Christian Science faith that this is an absolute healing straight from God. I went home and told the Christian Science practitioner, and she was devastated too. But she said that we would work it out in Christian Science." And so Rita Swan, with the help of her practitioner, prayed. When Matthew was 7 months old, the pain returned, this time worse than ever.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?